We are good to go.
All right. So, sorry. Roll call.
Pam Weil,
Here.
Chuck Overby,
Here.
EJ Buss.
EJ's here.
EJ is here somewhere. She's just muted.
Yeah.
Merle Heidemann,
Here.
John Novello,
Here.
Alex Smith,
Here.
Adam DeLay.
Here.
All right. And now we have the introduction of a new Parks Board member, Tim.
So pleased to introduce you to our newest Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission member, Adam DeLay. Adam filled out an application, and Councilmember Bacon and I met with him, and he's here today. And if you'd like to say a few things.
Well, first of all, hello, everyone. Really happy and glad to be here. Like he said, my name is Adam DeLay, and like to thank Mr. McCaffrey here and Councilmember Bacon for the opportunity to serve on the commission. Quick little background about me. I moved here to the community in July after bouncing around the Lansing area for about 10 years after graduating from MSU. Lived in City of Lansing, Delta. Was in Lansing Township most recently, where I spent a couple of years on the Township Board of Trustees. And while I was on the board, I served on the Township's Parks and Rec Commission there. So I have a little bit of familiarity about trust fund grants, things like that. So, and currently I work for the Department of Health and Human Services as a legislative liaison. Prior to that, I worked for Governor Whitmer. Prior to that, I worked for Senator Stabenow. So I've bounced around a little bit, both in terms of where I live and professionally, but I've got a 2-year-old daughter, which is why the Parks Commission really was something that I wanted to be involved in. We live right near Harrison Meadows and the Northern Tier Trail. And so, you know, she loves it, going to the parks, and we plan on growing our family and want to make sure that whatever I can do in my community to make sure we have a great, robust system. It's one of the reasons we moved to East Lansing. So really excited for the opportunity and to start to learn as much as I can. So thanks so much for having me.
Welcome.
Pam, I think you might be muted.
Bear with me. All right. Now I'm echoing.
No, you're good.
Approval of the agenda. Does someone want to move it?
I'll move it.
Seconded.
No. Does someone want to move the agenda?
Yeah, I moved. I don't know if you can folks hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. How's that? John, did you move it?
Yep.
And I'll second. It's
Okay,
Alex
there
here.
we go. Okay. All those in favor of moving the agenda as we're seeing it now?
Aye.
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 All right. Approval of the minutes from the September 16th meeting.
So moved.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of moving the minutes without amendment, say aye.
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 Did anybody support?
Oh, sorry, did we get a second support?
We didn't.
Seconded.
All right, there we go. All right. Do we have any public?
Yes, we do. The caller is phone number ending in 534. You may unmute and address the commission.
Hello.
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Good, thank you. This is Ann Hill at 685 Buteo. I wanted to thank Chuck and Wendy for taking the time out of their day to meet me over at the Northern Tier Trail. I think our discussion was very fruitful, and I do appreciate the time that they took. Also, I had the opportunity to attend the Commission on the Environment earlier this week. And I was curious, do any of the projects that go forward from the Parks and Rec, do any of them go to the Commission on Environment for approval as well? When I spoke with the folks, there was only one person that remembered seeing any of the proposals come forward, and he said that that was even several years ago. So as we make these decisions to bulldoze the trees, to pave over extensive parts of the trails, of the parks, we go to, instead of using natural ground cover, for example, the gravel, and we want to put pavement over top of them, it just seems to me like that's counter to being environmentally friendly. So I'm just curious as to whether the Parks and Rec group goes through that group to get approval for the various projects that they have. And lastly, would be regarding the budget. I noticed, and thank you for having finance come forward and share this information. But it looks like we again have a general fund transfer of about $2 million. In 2013, we had 1.1 million transferred from general fund to Parks and Rec. Then again, a couple of years of 1.1 million. 2016, we had 1.3 million. 2017, we had 1.9 million. 2018, 1.99. That was 18. 2019, we had 2 million. And it looks like this year we had 2.1 million. So that seems like a lot of money that's transferring from general fund to Parks and Rec that's gone on a relatively steep climb. So just my thoughts. And I would appreciate, as we go through the meeting, hearing your input. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you. Do we have an answer about going in front of environmental evaluation for our projects?
So there have been projects when we've done presentations to the Commission on the Environment, and I'm not remembering exactly which projects they were. I'm going to ask Wendy maybe to participate a little bit in that question. So I know that we've gone to the Commission on the Environment. Our process does not require us to seek approval from the Commission on the Environment to have projects move forward. And it probably is not a bad idea to have the Commission on the Environment have a review as we put a project forward. So that's perhaps something that we could give consideration to as we look towards the future. Wendy, I know I'm certain you've attended Commission on the Environment meetings for projects, and if you'd like to expand on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. As Tim indicated, the process does not require review and approval by the Environmental Commission in general. Where there is an exception to that is if there are impacts to wetlands. If we are pursuing any kind of a wetland use permit, then a review and approval by the Commission on the Environment is required. So projects where that has happened are the White Park improvements that we just recently implemented. And I think there have been others, but that's the one that initially comes to my mind. There have been other projects where we have involved the Commission on the Environment because it made sense within that particular project. As an example, with the Bailey Park, we actually spoke to the Commission on the Environment several times, I think. We were looking for their input and support for the project because there are aspects of it that are related to, you know, environmentally friendly factors. We've got a couple of native landscape gardens that are pollinator friendly, which is a big program that the Commission on the Environment is working on. So there have been projects that we have involved them in because it made sense from the project standpoint. The other project like that is they have been involved in the planning for the improvements at the Patriarch Park restroom and pavilion building. We have a lot of really kind of interesting environmentally friendly practices that we're implementing there. And so they've been very helpful and supportive through that process as well. We do have a project coming up, which is, we've spoken to this commission several times about it, the relocation of a portion of the Northern Tier Trail. I believe there will be some wetland impacts on that work, so we will need to bring that to the Environmental Commission for their review. They have not reviewed it at this point in time. We're just getting to the point where we'll be looking at submitting that project for permits. So I imagine we'll be talking to them sometime within the next few months so that we can be prepared for work in the springtime. But that's generally how we interact with the Commission on the Environment with park projects.
All right, thank you, Wendy. All right, Tim, you want to talk about the fiscal year 2020 unaudited year-end report?
Sure. Justin, I think we have thank you. So in your packet, there is information on the budget. You saw it in the same format that you typically receive when we provide you our budget information for your review prior to City Council approval of the budget on an annual basis. But what I thought I would do is add a few comments, provide a little bit more information by way of background for fiscal year end 2020 as we look as we start looking towards the future and clearly all the COVID-19 pandemic sort of challenges that we're going to be facing. But first of all, with respect to the 2020 year-end budget, the Parks and Recreation Fund specifically, we ended up with actual operating revenues of $3,766,234 and operating expenses of $3,813,758. So we ended up with a $47,524 operating deficit. Justin, if you could go to the next, thank you. So first thing I'm going to say is commissioners may remember that at one point in time, we were talking about as much as a $300,000 year-end operating deficit for fiscal year 20. And there were several things that we did through the remaining last quarter of 2020 to mitigate that. And I will share some of that information with you as part of this presentation. But although we used $47,524 of had 500 that operating deficit, that leaves us in the Parks and Recreation Fund with a $53,398 fund balance moving into fiscal year 2021. So next slide, please. So this budget shows you actual revenue versus budgeted revenue in the context of the difference, all right? So in terms of intergovernmental revenue, we ended up with more intergovernmental revenue than we had in the budget. Charges for services, significant decline compared to budget. Rental income, which is typically reservations. Community support through fundraising. All of those were significant less revenues in each of those categories. The next slide shows you these categories in a little bit more detail. Can you go to them? Thank you. So intergovernmental revenues, the reason we had more revenue than forecasted was Julianne Jennings of our staff applied for and received through the state of Michigan, which was federal money, child care relief grants in the amount of $97,500. And those grants were very helpful to get us through fiscal year 20. The revenue was assigned to fiscal year 20, and some of the expenses will actually occur in fiscal year 2021. So that was very helpful in terms of getting through the final quarter and going out and getting, I think, 3 or 4 different months of grants that were applied, the revenue was applied to fiscal year 2020. On the other side of the coin, the jazz festivals received $18,000 less in grants in fiscal year 2020. So the net positive gain was $78,000 for our intergovernmental revenue category. Charges for services is our earned income, and that, of course, it includes pretty much every category of charges for services: past sales, class registration and program fees, concession sales out at the aquatic center, and refunds for classes and past sales due to the closing and cancellations. So that meant that all of our class revenue and past sales revenue was down $473,000. Interesting to know, we did process roughly $35,000 in refunds for classes and past sales due to closings and cancellations for folks that were on electronic fund transfers for passes and things of that nature, or who had prepaid for classes or athletic leagues or something of that nature. Our rental reservation income was down $162,674, and that is income from rental reservations through the community center as well as athletic field rental reservation revenue. Community support is a number of different factors that contribute to that, and those are contributions, sponsorships, and the primary area where that revenue was down was the Jazz Festival. We, of course, did not have the Jazz Festival, so we didn't collect the money for contributions and sponsorships and what have you. Good news with respect to community support prior to COVID is we did receive a $15,000 contribution, if you will, from the East Lansing Basketball Club for resurfacing of the gymnasium floors in the Hannah Community Center, as well as some painting work that we had done in both of the gymnasiums. And that was about a $30,000 project, and the basketball club paid for approximately 50% of that project. We also did a brick paver sale for Patriarch's Park Playground that generated about $6,000. Probably, well, what will happen in fiscal year 2021 is that revenue will be taken from the fund balance and shifted to the Parks Capital Fund, because those funds will go towards the John Dunn Memorial Maintenance Program that was set up by the East Lansing Rotary Club. And that will add to the approximately $25,000 that we have for future maintenance of the playground in the park project at Patriarch's Park. And also we had an additional contribution from the All of Us Express Children's Theater Board of Directors in the amount of $4,500 from their 501c3 to offset the cost of keeping our artistic theater director, well, not keeping her on, but bringing her off of layoff so that we could offer some of our children's theater programs virtually as we progressed through the spring and early summer. We did earn additional interest income of $2,006. I don't have an answer for how we did that, but we did that. And then our general fund transfer was down by $205,360 as compared to budget. And the reason for this is, as I suggested a few minutes ago, we had thought that we were going to have as much as a $300,000 operating deficit. The finance director did plan to move that money into the Parks and Recreation Fund from the general fund when it was determined, and she amended the budget, and when it was determined we didn't need that, that amendment did not need to take place, and that fund transfer did not take place. Next is the expense side. Our personnel services were down as compared to budget by 280,000 plus. Operating costs down by 449,000, and capital outlay down by 36,800. So our variance was our expenses were down by $767,000. Going into the details around that particular item, we had 13 full-time staff that we had on the State of Michigan Workshare program for partial work scheduled each week and a partial unemployment schedule for each week. And that took place for about a 3-month period. We had 73 part-time staff on layoff. A portion of those folks have returned. And we did not hire our seasonal summer employees, specifically not the number that we would normally do for the summer kids camp, because we ended up starting the kids camp in August, and no aquatic center staff were hired, and other specialty camps are examples of staff positions that were not hired the last quarter of fiscal year 2020. Obviously, when you're not operating your facilities, your operating costs will go down. So several expense categories that include but aren't limited to operating supplies, materials, and chemicals for the Family Aquatic Center, as well as the indoor pool, contract instructors that we didn't end up hiring, performers and entertainers for community events and the jazz festival and the like. The Connect magazine, which we publish 3 times a year, we didn't publish twice. And then of course, utilities expenses were down for gas and water and sewer. We found that our electric costs did not necessarily go down all that much. They went down a little, but not to the extent that utilities and gas costs went down. And we had a capital improvement project to improve the drainage on one of our ball fields at the soccer complex. And we postponed that project, saving another $36,800. So those are kind of goes over all of the sort of details that contributed to where we ended up. But I wanted to also talk for just a minute. This is kind of budget related, but it's really more how we have to this point supported the overall city organization during the pandemic. Wendy Longpre on our staff prepared and implemented the facility reopening plan for the City Hall and 54B Municipal Court. Some of you have been in the community center and seen some of the things that we've done to accommodate the return to work at the community center. Wendy took the responsibility on behalf of the organization to do a considerable amount of the work for City Hall and 54B. You can imagine it was an even bigger task this year because we were preparing for a national election here as we look into November. Justin Drenke, who facilitates this meeting, this Zoom portion of our public meeting, also does this for other organizations, for other boards and commissions within the organization. And Justin has been doing that for the Human Rights Commission meetings. He's been doing that for the Arts Commission meetings, and he's been doing that for the Police Oversight Committee. So that's an example where we've been providing additional assistance to other departments, to other ways in the organization. The Aquatic Center and the Hannah Community Center pool staff, some of them got to come back a little bit earlier from being laid off, because what we did in the first part of the summer is we provided the staffing for the pilot outdoor dining program that was held during the summer months. And those staff performed those duties. The expenses associated with those staff were covered, I believe, either through the Downtown Development Authority or the Downtown Management Board. But so they're not reflected in our budget, but that's where some of our staff helped out with other city functions. As well as when the outdoor dining program finished, our staff also became involved with the program that exists even currently today through the month of October is the Downtown Mask Ambassadors program. What those staff do is we set up a booth, if you will, downtown, and if individuals don't have a mask and they'd like to have a mask, we provide masks. Again, this is a DDA and DMB sponsored activity, and our staff takes care of that in the downtown for certain hours. I think 6 or 7 days a week at this point in time. The staff, again, has provided some assistance at City Hall and served as the health screening of both patrons and employees as they come into City Hall. We require anyone that enters City Hall, with the exception if they're coming into the clerk's office, we require all persons to go through a brief health screening and get their temperatures checked. And our staff have shared that responsibility with the cadet staff in the police department. And of course, the biggest thing that we've done is establish the satellite city clerk's office at the Hannah Community Center. That is operated pretty much on a full-time basis beginning the first week in October, and will operate as a satellite clerk's office through the election. And then in addition to that, we will have 2 polling places, precincts, if you will, at the community center on election day. And community members can stop by right now and register to vote and get information from the clerk's office. They're performing pretty much all those functions. Jennifer Schuster, the city clerk, actually did a very nice job of getting Marie Wicks, who's our former city clerk, to come back and run that satellite office for us. And so Marie is doing that for the city of East Lansing. So I just wanted to, and while we're talking about the context of budget, I also wanted to provide some information about how our department during the pandemic has and will continue to provide support to the total city organization. So that was, I know, quite a bit of information, but I wanted to provide that for fiscal year 20. Now, as we look towards fiscal year 2021, we started having meetings today with our finance department, and we'll start hopefully either in November or December being able to provide the commission with updates on where the Parks and Recreation Fund budget sits as we look towards completing fiscal year 21, which, as you know, started on July 1st and will end on June 30th. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. You have a question, Councilmember Bacon?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I think I've seen some of your numbers before, and I just really appreciate your creativity that you guys came up with here. This was, deck chairs on the Titanic, so to speak, and you were moving them around and really making it work, and really saved a lot of people's livelihoods and did a lot of good stuff. So I just want to thank you for being creative and not just folding up shop when you could have. So just it's pretty miraculous what you did. So thank you.
Hear, hear. And I received a refund, and it was super timely. I didn't have to request it. And I think that kind of service keeps people appreciating the park system and supporting it. So nice staff work on that. All right, are we ready to move on to the next topic?
You have another question, Councilmember Bacon?
No, I'm on my iPad, so if you see me reach forward, I'm muting myself.
It's not a wave.
Yeah.
All right, so consideration of advancing parks projects and initiatives, and I understand John is going to be speaking a bit on that.
Yeah, so hi, how y'all doing? So a couple months ago, we had that presentation from the pickleball folks, and it was a lovely presentation, and it got me sort of just getting curious about how we make decisions in terms of being thoughtful about equity and fairness and spreading out our funds to folks that may not have the same level of access that, you know, decently upper middle class white folks in the East Lansing area have to different kinds of things. And thinking about like how we actually, what kinds of decision making stuff that, you know, what kind of criteria do we have? How do we make these decisions? And we've had a great conversation, I think, since then. I've met with Tim a couple times. I met with Tim and Justin actually this last month, and we had a really great conversation at the Hannah Center actually. And anyway, so I just wanted to put together, I wanted to dig a little bit and see kind of what is being done out there. And I thought it might be helpful to share kind of what I found. And it's a lot. Tim, you already said this, but Tim had mentioned that this is a big topic right now in Parks and Rec across the country. And it was really true. So there's the National Recreation and Parks Association, NRPA, has a whole initiative called Parks for Inclusion Initiative that they've done tons of work for the past couple years. And the whole focus is really on policy development around best practices for program implementation to increase access to health opportunities, but they kept calling it health opportunities. So that's getting outside and being able to use parks for specific populations that tend to be underrepresented when parks decisions historically tend to be made. Those populations that they identified were 1, racial and ethnic minorities, 2, new Americans, which is both immigrants and refugee communities, 3, individuals with physical and cognitive abilities. I appreciate it as a mental health provider that they actually included cognitive abilities, so that was cool. And 4, members of the LGBTQ plus community. And, you know, looking at the kinds of things that they've been doing, just for some interesting stats, they did do a survey in the last couple of years to kind of look at other Parks and Rec agencies across the country to kind of see how they're kind of shaping up and how folks are doing. And it was interesting, they found that 74% tended to have at least some kind of inclusion around physical disabilities. 71% did something, some stuff around multicultural, ethnic, or racial communities, including them in their planning. 62% included programs or park planning around cognitive disabilities, and then for there it goes down pretty fast. 30% had specific considerations for LGBTQ plus communities, and 27% for new Americans. And 2 in 5 Parks and Rec agencies have, I thought was interesting, so 40% of all Parks and Rec agencies across the country have a specific and formal inclusion policy to ensure that all members of the community have access to enjoy parks and all that has to offer, which I thought was interesting too. So they're really pushing the idea of sort of trying to create more actual policies within Parks and Rec to kind of encourage the actual follow through with this stuff. And they of course talk about some interesting, they've got some best practices that they put together. They also talk a lot about exclusion. So in terms of thinking about inclusion, they find it helpful to also encourage folks to think about what exclusion actually looks like, because those are the things that sometimes are invisible to us, those of us with privilege that don't necessarily know when we're being exclusionary, right? It's not because we're necessarily intentionally being bad, but when we don't know something, we don't know something. So it's important to notice what exclusion actually is. And so in the case of thinking about Parks and Rec planning, 1 was communication. So having signs that are small print or they don't have large print. I think that generally speaking, I think a lot of our signage looks pretty good. Signage that doesn't include Braille or materials capable of working with screen readers, lack of closed captioning in videos, that kind of stuff. The second one I think is really significant for what this whole thing started talking about, and it's kind of where Tim and Justin and I were talking about the other day, was talking about community engagement, right? And so when we're thinking about actually doing planning, who is at the table, right? And if we're if the folks that are at the table are the ones that have access, the ones that have traditionally been at the table, then the people that are the voices that are making decisions about this, or just bringing it up, right, and saying, hey, we need this, and we could use this, and we can use this, might be the people that traditionally have access. And so there was a lot of talk in this language about sort of creating specific efforts to reach out to different communities, different stakeholders, different leaders in different communities, going to the places rather than just expecting them to come to us. This is one of the things that Tim and Justin and I were talking about, that when we put surveys out, you know, because we always do that, right? We say, well, we've got surveys and people can like comment on this stuff. But if it's, you know, if they have to come to the Hannah Center or to comment on stuff, or if they have to go to a website, right? How many people are doing it? Are we actually getting a wide range of, you know, of the population, wide enough to actually be representative of everybody, right? And so the idea is to kind of go to people and create space to like go to them, to listen to their voice, and do polling and do you know, surveys and that kind of stuff in the spaces that, you know, of where people actually are, and thinking about the different kinds of communities we might do, and being really intentional about that, having meetings, doing all that stuff. And then some other exclusionary things like physical exclusion, which is structural obstacles like lack of ramps, doorways that can't accommodate wheelchairs. To speak to kind of what the commenter said earlier, part of the reason that that trails are often paved tends to be so that more people can access them. So people that have different kinds of disabilities that may need wheelchairs or other kind of assistance in walking actually have greater access to actually use those trails. So that's some of the rationale behind that from an inclusionary standpoint. And then there's some other ones. There are so much out there about this. And so instead of just inundating you with the different kinds of topics about this, so what I thought I'd do is I just send an email, and I don't know if you want to post it somewhere again, you know, and show, like, there's videos and there's so much cool stuff out there. And there's best practices, and I can certainly answer questions about best practice. I mean, like, I wrote them, I didn't write them. So I can tell you what I found out. But I want to get to the thing I thought was the most interesting, because it's the thing that got me started thinking about this in the first place, which is this question about like how we make specific decisions about which things get funded and why we make those decisions, right? And I know Tim and Wendy are doing an awesome job of like looking at this stuff, and other folks I'm sure are involved in that too, like we've talked about, and we have conversation about that stuff. And so, but in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where my daughter now goes to college, which is just random and coincidental, they have put together a document called Criteria-Based System for MPRB, Minneapolis Parks and Rec Board, Capital and Rehabilitation Project Scheduling. So they've actually put together a specific set of criteria where they assign weighted numbers to the different projects to actually make it so that it kind of gets it away from like, you know, someone's interest in something, or just or someone's emotional attachment to a project or something like that. It actually lets that community make really conscious and thoughtful decisions, so that with specifically the idea that so what they say, each park was given an objective score for each of the following community and park characteristics criteria. The community characteristic values were determined at the neighborhood scale, and each neighborhood park that was within the neighborhood received that score. The park characteristic values were determined based on specific assets within each individual park. So for example, so in other words, the different characteristics are specifically made so that people, it starts from a consideration of equity. And that's the whole point of the whole thing. So in this case, and this may not be and we may not decide to do this, I'm just throwing this out there because I thought it was really interesting, the way to actually think about it. But for Minneapolis, which has, it's got racially concentrated areas of poverty. It's got some areas that are less safe, considered less safe than others. So they've got these different characteristics. So they've got community characteristics and park characteristics, and each one of them is given a different, like a possible number, 1 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 2. And depending on what they get, it helps them make a decision about which ones are the most important that we start with. And then it goes from there. And every year they do another, they go through it again, and it helps them. So things like, is a park dilapidated? So they'll go and do a specific, like they have people on staff that go out and then they rate the parks and they figure out like which ones are dilapidated and how dilapidated are they, and they get a rating for that. Which ones are in a racially concentrated area of poverty. And those ones then bump up. If they have a higher score, then we need to make sure that we're attending to those places, because those folks, those parks tend to not be like noticed, because those communities tend to have a quieter voice, and no one's necessarily paying attention in the same kind of way. So those go up in the ranking. And we know that when we put money into parks, that more people are starting to use those parks in those communities, and it's beneficial to the health and well-being of those communities, right? So it's really important that we pay attention to that stuff. Anyway, I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was a helpful way to have the discussion around this stuff differently, rather than it just be about, and we might do it in East Lansing, I have no idea, but I don't know, I just like that. So, and they say, and I looked at other places and there weren't really anyone else that was doing this. They're saying that, you know, I'm sure that they're promoting themselves and they feel really good about themselves. So they're saying that we're the first people to do this just this way. But I did think it was interesting. So again, there's a lot to say about this. I kind of wanted this to feel a little bit like a discussion, but I just wanted to throw out that is just some framework of some stuff that I've been like really paying attention to. But thoughts, questions, ideas, concerns?
I've got some thoughts.
Yeah.
Got a lot of thoughts. So I would suggest that we develop a subcommittee to discuss this further and to make some specific recommendations to this body. So I love the idea. We have a park inventory, and it's probably 4 or 5 years old now. I don't know when you could tell us, but we seem to have resources of interns, and we worked with Lori Strom, brought an intern to look at age-friendly kind of model of accessibility and usability. And so we may have that data already.
Oh, great.
So I just think it might, like, I would like to see some action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to see this body develop some proposed actions. And, you know, I love that checklist idea. Maybe we could talk about what that checklist idea would look like for us.
Mm-hmm.
What, you know, and
yeah, because you have to be specific to our community. And so we'd have to,
Sure.
So part of, I didn't mention this because again, so much and interest of time, and I can get talking a lot. So it does talk about best practices in terms of actually developing a policy for inclusion when it comes to specifically parks. And of course you start with assessing your community needs, right?
Right.
How do you assess your community needs? Start by looking around and you go to the people, right? But you have to then, number 2 is real inclusive community engagement, right? Which we already talked about, right? And then number 3 is then to create the plan. Within it includes continuous improvement as part of the plan. And we all talk about continuous improvement in terms of, you know, all the stuff needs to be improved, right? So, you know, the baseball diamond needs to be fixed every couple, you know, years and all that stuff. But part of continuous improvement is also recognizing that we won't get this right, right? And sort of the typical sort of white privilege thing that we all hang out with, those of us that are white, that we don't, that sometimes is invisible to us, is that we feel like we have to get it right the first time.
Right.
And we're not gonna, right? Like, so the idea is that we have to be comfortable with the idea that we might take a swing and they'll learn some stuff later that we like, oh, we missed this part. So that's okay, like, let's put that back in.
Right.
And part of the continuous improvement, a really important part of this is recognizing that we're just gonna keep going. We're gonna keep trying, and we're gonna learn more stuff, you know?
Right, and I will say that's why we want to get a process happening.
Yeah.
So we start taking actions that then we can look at the reaction and then take different actions. But until you're actually implementing something, there's no way to improve it because, you know.
Absolutely, right.
So I'm
Right.
really a proponent of getting the ball rolling and in the continuous improvement.
Absolutely.
You know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You start a process.
Right.
And so, and me and Tim were talking about this in terms particularly, you know, I'm a staff person at my heart, 40 years of staffing at the university. And I've also had 30 years of being on boards and commissions, very sensitive about people's time. and very interested in personally doing more work and asking, frankly, more of board and commission members.
Great.
And one of the successful things that I have found is to have boards and commissions attend other boards and commissions and bring that to those boards and commissions. That's something that, you know, can kind of fall on us. And Tim was mentioning that we've got our 5-year master plan cycle coming back in. That is a perfect time to reach out for input. And once again, sometimes people won't give it to you. You can't get on their agenda, but you just have to keep asking. And oh, that didn't work. Well, you know, maybe a table here. And, you know, who else has some suggestions of things we could attend and places we could post and that sort of thing. But yes, let's do it. Let's do something.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Ron, looked like you might be wanting to say something.
Yeah. I never know how to do this. This is the hardest part, I guess, really making sure we don't miss the target. I know sometimes we get eager to do something.
Right.
Just make sure it's what's really wanted or needed.
Needed.
That's the tricky part, because there's nothing worse than that look like, oh, if only I'd asked for this.
Right.
So,
and we got to do it with the right reason too. Like, we can't do it to pat ourselves on the back. Like, the purpose is a wholesale shift in the way that you just think about planning stuff.
Well, and leveraging our resources. We have a diversity committee. We have a diversity coordinator. What recommendations do they have?
Yeah.
What would they like to see us doing? What aligns with and supports processes that they're putting in place?
Well, John, you're clearly saying we need some set of criteria, but we're going to keep working on it. We're not going to complete a project, put it on the shelf over here and say it's done. Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and do give ourselves credit for coming up with the first document, but that it needs to be changing to reflect things that we got wrong, things that change in the community. And there's a lot here. I assume you see that. There is a lot here to take into account.
There is a ton. Yeah, but you're right. But Ron's absolutely right. We need to just make sure we're doing what makes sense. It's not just
and probably too, with an eye to the future. That's the tricky part with what you guys do. Like, you know, the day the project's done, that could be the day it's obsolete, which is really scary.
Project's never done. That's the continuous continuous improvement model, right? It is
a scary proposition.
And that's the anti-fragile. You thrive on change. You're responding to change and making micro corrections. And yes, I definitely would like to see a plan that gets this board and body working on that as we work through our processes.
I think you hit on something else too, looking at if things did take off, for example, trying to attract people who are 55 plus, more business downtown, like, okay, now what futurely, if this continued in this direction, what would that demand from us? And what, I know it's impossible to have a crystal ball, but I think that's a tricky thing here, because by the time you need it, it's kind of, you already need it. So I don't know what that looks like either. I don't have a good answer, but that's what great communities tend to, for some reason they just have it like, oh, I knew this was going to happen. And I perceived, you know, there would be more 55-year-olds and they need this type of amenity or thing. And very challenging. The vision, I guess, is the.
But if you have a process that's open, oh, gee, now we're making sure we're hitting people in this 5 square miles, and now they look like this, and we're getting whatever percentage of them, whoever they are. You know, we found that in the Ingham County parks. We, during my tenure, went from almost no East Indians using the parks to a lot of, what did East Indians want to see? You know, what did that immigrant group, what kind of amenities were important to them in the parks? And we saw the change in our user base, and we reached out, and that, you know, that can really happen organically if you're paying attention. You want to paying
attention, right? And it's just an open mind and open heart about it, just curiosity and, you know, willingness to
make sure we take into account changing demographics and changing leadership. I mean, we're at a point in our country where I'm sorry to say this, as a baby boomer, we are retiring and others are coming up. Adam, you're in that group. We welcome that. and Alex, you too, and we need to take those things into account.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll give the Bailey Park is a perfect example. It's being used by all ages, but the young people that are using it are just delightful.
Nice.
Yeah. Look at this, just because now we're talking about it. Just happen to have this on my desk. I got
Oh, it's all
Nice.
over, John.
ARRP thing today in the mail.
Congratulations.
Dun, dun, dun. And so it begins.
It will happen if you just sit long enough.
It will. It just did.
But one of the beauties of the ARP age-friendly community information and the research that they've done is, boy, people want the same thing. Almost everything that is age-friendly for older people is particularly resonant for young families with young children.
Yeah.
Now, there's a cool young people demographic that may want things differently, but there is a lot of overlap. And quality experiences, kindness, and good customer service, being treated like you're welcome, that goes a long way for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank
But
you.
yes, go ahead.
Well, you put a lot of work into this and a lot of thought. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to Tim and Justin, but Tim, again, I don't think I've said this enough about this thing, but Tim, for what it's worth, has been super open and very curious and wanting to, like, I think Tim's words were, he really wants to see this kind of change happen, before he's done with his job. So I just want to thank Tim for the opportunity to kind of, have this conversation. It's really been open and awesome. So
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
So
What's our
Thank
next
you,
step?
John.
thank
What's
you.
our next step?
Yeah, I like the idea of a
And
subcommittee.
how fast do we need to work?
Yeah.
So do we want to see if, can you arrange, I don't know how the process of spinning off a subcommittee works. Do we need a request? Do we need to request the city council? Can we do it informally?
I believe that the commission has the ability to create a subcommittee without, any formal act, higher than yourselves.
Okay, so
What
John,
I might suggest, if I
Oh, go ahead.
could, what I might suggest, if I could, is if you want to have, if you want to have assign a chair, John.
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Oh no. What have I
Then perhaps John could meet with staff, and then maybe we come back at the next meeting and
Great.
And see if they're how large of a committee you want. You don't want more than 2 or 3 members of this body in there.
I would
Not
strongly
because you
suggest-
don't want the input, but if we have 4 members of this commission, then we'll have a quorum.
Right.
So is that so open meetings act? We have to avoid a quorum?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And so if it's a quorum,
Unless you want to have a committee that's going to be subject to the Open Meetings Act, which is fine if that's what you want to do. So.
yeah, I think we should talk about that because I don't like the idea of restricting membership. Like if somebody wants to participate, and maybe it does become a pre-meeting to this meeting if it's enough interest. I've done that in past boards where first we meet for an hour or a half hour before, and then it's all open meetings because it's all part of the process. But yeah.
Knowing that's one of the things that your chair and staff can make some recommendations and come back with sort of a.
Okay, good. Yeah,
right.
great. And yeah, so good. Yeah.
Great.
Yay.
So I'll get with you, Tim, and then kind of make that plan.
Yes,
Is that how we'll do that? Okay.
We'll get in contact with you.
Perfect. Excellent.
And we don't want to burn you out, John, either. So, this is
What else am I doing?
fun and interesting for you and whatever it takes. But the more the merrier.
No, that's good. Thanks, guys.
All right, good.
All right.
Hannah Community Center Committee follow-up.
So
Chuck?
no,
Or
that's
John?
if it's okay, I'll take that. And when Councilmember Bacon came on as our liaison, he suggested he was quite interested in continuing to learn about the various things that we did. And I talked about the Community Center Committee and the outcomes of the Community Center Committee and Councilmember Bacon, and then the two members of our commission that were on the committee had a brief meeting. And of course, the meeting, you know, we talked about all the outcomes, but then we, of course, went directly to the conversation about funding. And we've just kind of started looking at options for funding. And I don't know exactly where we go from here, but we're gathering more information. And, you know, at one point we talked about perhaps a voter approved initiative, but just starting to have conversations with respect to that. Councilmember Bacon, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just think you guys kind of be in a kind of last in first off position where it comes to funding. You know, it's just how things are prioritized. It's very difficult in tough times to generate some of the grant funding. We don't even know how this is going to look. Me and Tim were just talking about just trying to project out over the next couple of years where those discretionary dollars are even going to go. This could be a rough couple of years in the world of parks and recreation, or any, you know, more of the more discretionary areas, and just trying to stabilize funding and whatever that looks like, and just exploring and turning over every rock and making sure we're looking and being, I think you've been about as creative as you can be as far as, you know, making lemonade and that kind of thing. I think it's time to try to find something a little more stable and just explore it and make sure it's fiscally responsible, you know, all that due diligence, and we'll just let the chips lie where they may from there. But we'll do our due diligence around funding, and I think you guys did a lot of good work in that Hannah Center project to just kind of look at funding. That was a lot of, and I think it kind of flopped a little bit because of COVID. I think that's sounds like the new intro for everything, but I think it's time to revisit it at least. I mean, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees on anything towards the ballot from the voters, that there'll be the political will or anything else to do some of these things. But I think we need to be prepared and make sure we have our ducks in a row just in case the opportunity presents to present it to the voters.
All right. So yeah, it's funny to think about where we were initially talking about the Hannah Center Committee, and anyway, whole different world, though. I think people are appreciating their parks and their community centers now more than ever in many ways.
I agree. That was the other side of the coin.
And I've got to say, my 2 cents on this is I am very interested in resilience and self-sustaining situation, and a emergency and community-based center, maybe with a generator, you know. So how we position it is also how you get grants and what sort of things you're, you know, what kind of role it serves in the community. So anyway, all right. Recommended changes in guidelines for naming public park property or public property in general. I thought we were going to get
to do that, or would you like for me to do that? I'm sorry.
Tim, go ahead from my perspective.
So at the meeting last month, we talked about, Chuck and I kind of putting together further thoughts with respect to that. Chuck and I had a meeting, we put together an outline kind of, and I don't have suggested language at this point in time. Based on that outline, I was hoping that we could perhaps have that for the November meeting, possibly the December meeting. And so it's still a work in progress, but we wanted to report back on that topic.
Yeah, because remember, we couldn't vote on it because it wasn't on the agenda. And then the suggestion was made that we get the actual draft wording to present to the city council.
Sure.
So that to make their job easier. But yeah, so it'd be great if we'd have something like that for November. All right, emergency.
Pam,
yes.
If I could just add a brief comment. So Tim's absolutely right. He and I are working together on this. And one of our goals, and this was comments that we made in the recommendations from the naming committee to the city council, is we want it to be a more inclusive process, both from the standpoint of those we are considering to honor and those that we ask to comment and wade in from the community and making public comments. So those are two things that we're going to be working on incorporating into the new policies.
Okay, so that's, you want to reflect that in the ordinance. That's cool. All right, city emergency response plan as it may relate to parks and recreation functions.
So we have a document. So with respect to this item, interest from the commission on learning a little bit more about the preparedness response plan that we have for the Parks and Recreation Department function. And we've prepared several documents as required by various executive orders at the state of Michigan and county health official as part of our reopening plans. Of course, the authority for that has really been an interesting conversation over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks, as everyone knows. And, the executive orders that were done by the governor then were determined that the Supreme Court had a different view with respect to that. And then the Department of Health and Human Services provided a number of additional executive orders that perform many of the same functions that the governors do. And then we have the county health official. So that's been an interesting sort of puzzle to put pieces together over the course of the last few months, but we've been following that as best we can. I understand now the state legislature has something that perhaps they're working on. I did not listen to the governor's executive briefing today, so I don't know what happened. Our commission now has a staff person from the MDHHS. He may want to make some sort of comments about that before this is all said and done this evening. But anyway, the very first document that's sort of a guiding principle for us is the City of East Lansing Employees Return to Work Workplace Safety Measures document, and that's prepared by the Department of Human Resources, using all of the things that came out of the executive orders, all of the conversations and what have you. In addition to that, at the citywide level, our city manager and our fire chief serves as the city's emergency response coordinator, as well as other key staff have been attending meetings at least weekly that include representatives from the health department, include representatives from other local municipalities and townships, certainly the county health official and what have you. So we get updates as we look at our plans and putting together various documents and protocols as we've gone through in terms of our opening processes and procedures. The Department of Parks and Recreation has a preparedness response plan that mirrors much of the plan prepared by the Human Resources Department. And then in addition to that, we've created a number of what we're calling unit-specific plans. We have established a reopening guide for the front desk, for the community center front desk staff. They went through an extensive training before they were brought back to work on protocols and what have you. That was led by Lois Fogarty. The fitness center guidelines, Kathleen Miller has put together a number of protocols and guidelines and worked with Wendy Longpree with respect to that. Our aquatic specialist, Dee Crothers, has put together swim pool protocols, guidelines, procedures for the community center swimming pool. Kathleen Miller has put together protocols and guidelines for reopening for our recreation and arts classes. We have rental reservations, which Jennifer Wyatt has worked on. Not a lot of rental reservations at this point. We're waiting until after we get through the election, and then we'll start looking more at some of our rental reservations and class offerings. And then obviously our kids camp, because our kids camp is a state licensed program, which we started up in August. That program ended probably 4 weeks after it started. but now we are doing the full day long remote learning program. We have approximately 25 families participating in that, 24, 25 children participating in that on a full day remote learning program at the community center. And staff, before opening both the kids camp and then the remote learning program, went through extensive training conducted by the state of Michigan. It's their licensing agency. The acronym is LARA, L-A-R-A. I can't remember what all those words mean. And then the Primetime Senior Program has put a back to work plan together, and that has been shared with all the other staff. And Kelly Arndt and her folks have worked on that and put that together as they prepare to work towards reopening. Justin has worked closely with Carla Forrest Hewitt on the farmers market opening plan. If you recall, our farmers market opened up almost exactly as scheduled, 1 week after it was originally scheduled to open. Extensive protocols that were followed. We've staffed up. We used to have like 2 staff folks, possibly 3 at a farmers market. We have 5 staff folks at each farmers market each week, and they're doing a lot of work to make sure that the protocols were created and followed and what have you. So it's an ongoing process. The documents are fluid. Whatever we have today could be changing tomorrow, and we're continuing to work with respect on our COVID-19 plans and trying to figure out what's best. Now, I will also say, we don't know what's going to happen as we look towards the future. If, as we progress through November and December, if the COVID pandemic is going to increase and we're going to have more cases and it's going to become more widespread, we may be put in a future where we have to close down again. Obviously, the hope is, let's be optimistic and try to move towards a environment where it's continuing to improve. That may be overly optimistic, and we will continue to do things on a little bit more at a time as we look towards the future. So that's my update. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I just have a comment, Tim. That's a boatload of work. And I've watched you and all the people in the city work really hard to help us be safe and to feel safe. Those are 2 separate things. And I appreciate all your efforts, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought it's been interesting to watch this whole thing play out at the staff level, at all levels of not just our department, but the city organization, and how watching all the staff pull together and really come together and try to figure things out to try to provide a much higher level of service under George Lahannis's leadership. And it's been really interesting to participate in this process. It's certainly unlike anything I've experienced in my 40 years in municipal government.
Right.
Right. I think you guys have done a really great job. Yeah, but I do have concerns about numbers and not calling emergencies having a number. But I got to say, this is on the agenda because I requested this be added to the agenda after a conversation with another board member regarding the email that I sent to the city council, and I CC'd everyone on. This person felt that it was undue influence of me to identify myself as the chair of this committee. And I said that everybody, included them in my follow-up response as well. And if anybody has any questions about that aspect, I'd be happy to address them. I want to tell you that I find it challenging. I have to wonder if a different person in this position, right to identify themselves as a chair, would have been questioned. It is the kind of interaction that I have dealt with continuously in IT as the only woman and the only minority individual in the room, frequently in a leadership role where I have to explain my right to make decisions as a leader again and again. So I was very conscientious in the wording. It is the only time I have ever reached out to the city council, and it was a requirement of my disaster recovery continuity certification duties to declare clearly and publicly where I stood. Because otherwise I may be in a position with a client who says, weren't you the chair of a committee that chose to open above what you are now recommending as a percentage of positive cases in testing? So I think I was very clear. I think I was very explicit. I believe I have the freedom to speak, and that as the chair, to identify myself as such. So.
Well, I think, and I totally appreciate that, Pam, and you absolutely do have the freedom to speak and talk about what your thinking is. When I read it, I didn't care at all what you said, it was fine. But I think when I saw that, just at the end, when I saw that you had put the thing on it, I don't care whether you're the chair or not, I think I were to sign it as part of the Parks and Rec too, I would wonder if that doesn't end up looking like I'm speaking for the body. That was my thought about it.
That's one of the reasons
right?
I CC'd everyone and quite explicitly said that the commission in our discussion did not seem concerned about the issues that I raised.
Okay,
and that's one of the reasons. Well, I wanted to be as transparent as possible, but I wanted to make sure that everyone saw how I characterized the meeting. And if they had a different view or perception, that they could speak up. So that, yeah, I wanted to make clear, because there wasn't much interest in the committee, to say that this is my opinion. It's happens to be in my professional bailiwick, as well as I happen to be the chair of a body that is making these decisions. So.
Well, if I could add a comment, Pam, I respect your position, and I think you raise legitimate concerns. My concern is the basic question that I ask myself is, may the commission members use their positions or their titles to express a personal opinion? And I think that's separate from, we have a discussion in the commission, we come to a position, and that position is A, whatever that is. And then each of us in our positions are free to express that the commission has this position.
I was expressing a professional opinion as a certified continuity professional that I needed documented, and I needed to come out publicly and document my stance. I have the right to speak. I just find it very insulting that my ethics were impugned, and I find it very ironic that past chairs of this committee have had pet hobbies that then the city spent money on. So the idea that I'm trying to unduly influence by expressing my concern for people's health and well-being seems ironic. I will also add that no outcome, as far as I know, so I would also add that we are in the middle of another giant spike, and that was my concern. That if we're moving forward and not acknowledging that we have a high rate of positive cases, how many do we have to take an action? So I'm very concerned about the politicization of this response. I'm very concerned about even saying that the election is going to make a difference on what plans we invoke. I would really love to see it purely by numbers. So at this rate, this is what we choose to do. But that's my recommendation for the city. That's why I sent the email to the powers that be. And that's, I've said my piece on it. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to take up anybody else's time with this if the body I had perceived was not interested in the discussion. So that's it.
Let's say from our perspective, we appreciate your recommendations, and definitely are following, we were just trying to follow lockstep with what Linda recommends for us to do. We've had there's very little political conjecture, anything from our perspective. There's almost zero pushback from any person in our body. So if anything, we would like to do more. We've gone kind of to the extent of our powers, and we're just kind of hopeful. We need some breaks, and we needed some things from across the street, at Michigan State, and we needed a lot of things to go our way. But if anything, we're in complete agreement with you, and look to try to we're doing everything within our powers and have there's little to no debate or politicization from our perspective, or the staff or anyone. We've gotten little pushback on anything we've tried to do. It's just some of the things we try to do are very limited. So yeah, it's tough, but I thank you for your input. Okay, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I don't have much to say, but I do think this is kind of a lesson in the challenges and the energy that it takes frequently to be in it feels like, I don't know. It feels like maybe if I was a big man and maybe white, would not have been impugned, because that is defending my right to speak. God knows in IT, that is a reoccurring reality. And I'm just sorry that it had to happen here, and that I had to spend energy doing it, that I didn't have my eyes on the renaming the park prize to maybe be able to drive that forward and get action taken. So you spend energy fighting and putting these fires out instead of being able to move forward. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it is, people just have a perception and they can't help but go with it. So
no, I think you're speaking to, and we're not here to do this, but there are, with biases, it's just how much time and energy is wasted. And I sit and debate oftentimes what would have been accomplished if we weren't dealing with this, and particularly when you are the minority or the person, kind of the outlier in the group, and you're having to defend either some type of bias or some type of prejudice or some type of whatever, even if it's very subtle, the amount of energy that gets wasted on that's not lost on me. So I get it. But ultimately it's the work that matters. And if there's any offense, we want to, refocus on the work, but not to minimize your feelings, and,
right, no,
or make them invalid, because
right,
you don't got to come to me to be invalidated. I'm probably going to validate whatever you're saying.
Right.
But yeah, it wasn't taken that way from our perspective. If there was no undue influence or anything like that. But I understand sometimes the fear of the peering eyes that are outside of our body that do take things, and it can go a million different ways. And I never want anything you guys do here, and I talked to Tim about this, to be, even as we're talking about funding, to be politicized, or even potentially, and that we talked about that in our meeting. And there's just no way with some of the things we want to do and trying to get to a ballot. I want you guys, as the least political, most bipartisan thing that you can ask for is parks. Yeah. So my fear is in that area, nothing to do with any of this other stuff. I want you guys to be the darlings of East Lansing. So.
All right. Well, thanks. I appreciate that, Ron.
No problem.
Any other comments, questions? I think it was a real learning opportunity, people. That's what I thought. The Stoics tell us we should teach, and so
if you're
real world example.
As a staff, if you're with Elaine Hardy around, who's going to beat us down with these biases, and we all have them, and they come up in many different ways. All of us, and we went through an 8-hour session on Saturday as a body, and there was tears shed. It was painful. I'm going to tell you, and I've been in corporate America for 22 years. I've been in every type of diversity, bias, any kind of training you could imagine. I've had it. And there was adults in that training really struggling with different things. And that was just with George, Elaine, in the council body. And just, when you start tackling this stuff, it's in there. Does it drive us all 100%? No, but does it impact our decisions? Yes, even unconsciously. So, challenging. It's tough stuff. We've been at this for a few hundred years. We'll figure it out. So,
Only 40 or so making real progress. So it's still new. So yeah. All right. Are we ready to move on to director's report?
Okay, so we have the Bailey Park ribbon cutting on Friday at 2 o'clock at Bailey Park. And rain or shine, we're going to go ahead and do that. About the only thing that could stop us would be a thunderstorm, I think, at this point in time. We do have to give consideration to all the social distancing requirements and all the capacity requirements and things of that nature. This project was a popular project. We've talked about it. And we may have more people at this ribbon cutting than we've ever had, which is good. But at the same time, we're going to have to be careful about it. So if you can't make it, don't feel bad, I guess is what I'm saying. But we are going to have that at on Friday at 2 o'clock. And we'll, if you can be there, great. If you can't, we're going to, we'll let you know how it went when it's all said and done. A couple more things real quickly. There's an Open Meetings Act and FOIA training scheduled for next week, Thursday, 7 o'clock p.m. I think each of you, with the exception of our newest commissioner, should have received an email directly from Council Secretary Emily Gordon.
I did receive that.
Pardon?
I did get that.
Oh, you did? Okay, even Adam got that. So this is a training that I don't know if Councilmember Bacon wants to say anything about it, but our council would really like as much participation from our commissioners as we can get. And besides for the parliamentary procedures training that we do, this is the first time, I think, or maybe the second time we're doing the Opens Meeting Act and FOIA training. And if your schedule permits, please take the opportunity to participate in that meeting. If you want to, you can respond directly to the invitation, or if you want, get with Jane, and Jane will make sure that you get appointed, okay? So I wanted to just add one thing. I had the opportunity tonight to go out on a walk before I came to the meeting on the trail system, and it was really consistent with everything that we've been talking about here. It was really kind of cool. I'm out on the trail, on the Northern Tier Trail, accessed it from the neighborhood that we live in, and I don't want to say that there was tens of people there. I don't want to say that there was dozens of people that I am sure used our trail tonight. I want to say there was hundreds of people that used our trail in various sections tonight. And it was really cool to see. In addition to that, I walked by the softball complex and, softball complex, aquatic center, dog park facility. Dog park had no less than 24 dogs, and the parents of the dogs were all there. So I want to say maybe 50 people in the dog park. And every one of our softball fields is being used for soccer play. So I'm thinking, this is really consistent with the conversation I had with Councilmember Bacon when he first came on board. And one of the things that I think it was either Adam or Alex or both that said, through this whole COVID thing, your local parks and recreation, particularly our local parks and recreation here in East Lansing, seem to be gaining popularity, gaining participation. And these are perfect examples of where that happened. I'm looking at the trails projects that we've had over the course of the last several weeks and several years now. And I was thinking about the vote that occurred just prior to the COVID, where we renewed the millage for Ingham County trails. The Ingham County, as Ingham County residents, 74% of us across the entire county that voted for the trails and parks millage. I'm going to get the data on how many and what the numbers were here in East Lansing. I'm going to suggest that in East Lansing, we were probably closer to 80% that voted in favor of renewing that county trails and parks millage. So I just wanted to just make a real quick point, sort of an editorial comment that we appreciate the work that our commission's doing and all your support, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you, Tim, and the staff. Beautiful. All right, Commissioner Communication. Alex, do you have something?
Not tonight, thank you.
All right. Merle, do you have anything?
Nothing.
How about you, EJ? Oh, unmute. You got to unmute.
I don't know. I've got my thing on. I don't know. I'm a different generation. I don't know.
You look good.
Thanks.
No comments about any goings on?
I'm under. You can't hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. You're unmuted.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, okay. I mean, why would I say? I did. Now I've lost my train of thought, which is something to do with the trails, etc. And that I agree with Tim that I bet it was 80%, and that shows, very large public support in East Lansing for parks in general. I mean, the trails are certainly one aspect, but I think it shows general support for Parks and Rec in East Lansing.
Excellent. Adam, do you have something?
I guess just to say, I gotta talk quieter now. My wife just put my daughter to sleep and she's right there. But just appreciate the opportunity and excited to learn and enjoyed my first meeting here. And thanks again to Councilmember Bacon for selecting me for this commission, and just excited, and hopefully I'll try to make it out there Friday, maybe to meet some of you guys in person down the road, and just looking forward to moving forward.
Welcome aboard. Chuck?
I have nothing to add.
Ron? Anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just happy to see you guys. This is a really fun commission to work with.
Yeah, thanks. John? Nothing? All right, anybody else? Final thoughts before we adjourn? All right, I'll call it adjourned. Everybody have a good month, and looking forward to what's next.
Thank you, guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Halloween, that's what's next.
Yeah, that's next.